All right, so welcome in, everyone. You know how we do deep dives into all sorts of stuff? Well, this time we're tackling 2 Peter 3:18.
But with a twist.
Oh, yeah, absolutely a twist. We're going way beyond just, like, what the verse says. I mean, listeners already know that, right?
Yeah, they're pastors, Bible study leaders.
Exactly. So we wanted to uncover these unique angles, these really fresh perspectives. Like, how can you bring this verse to life for your congregation, make it really hit home?
And thankfully, we don't have to reinvent the wheel here.
Oh, totally. So we dove deep into sermons and analyses that are already out there, just to find those golden nuggets.
And it's amazing, the stuff we found. Some pastors, they're weaving in metaphors, like some really powerful ones.
And even using these, like, super everyday examples to get at these deep spiritual truths. Who would have thought about that, right?
It's pretty cool.
It is. Okay, so picture this. You're prepping your next sermon, maybe your Bible study, and it's on 2 Peter 3:18. But you're thinking, man, I got to move past those same old grow in your faith platitudes.
Right. Happens to the best of us.
Totally.
Yep.
So where do you even begin to, like, find those fresh insights?
Well, one thing we notice is this emphasis on spiritual growth being active.
Okay, active, not passive. So what's the difference there?
I mean, a lot of pastors really zeroed in on the actual Greek word for grow in the verse.
Okay, getting into the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, and like Valley Center Community Church, they pointed out how the Greek suggests this ongoing effort. It's not a one-and-done thing, it's continuous, it's intentional.
So not just like a lightning bolt moment of transformation.
Right, more like this steady, consistent upward climb.
Gotcha. But, I mean, how do you make that exciting for folks?
You need the right imagery, the right metaphor.
Yeah.
And Valley Center, they use this analogy of a tree needing deep roots to thrive.
Okay, I'm picturing that. Makes sense, right? You need that strong foundation. Otherwise, any little storm could just knock you over.
Exactly.
So I guess it makes you think about what those roots look like in our lives, right? Like,
right.
What are those things that actually connect us more deeply to Christ?
Right. And it's not just about knowing facts about Jesus. It's about truly knowing him, like in a close relationship.
Okay, yeah. Huge difference there.
Yeah. And Linked UP Church, they contrasted just surface level knowledge with that deep connection you get from true friendship.
Okay, yeah. So it's not just knowing, the pastor's name. It's knowing their heart, their story.
Exactly. Makes you think, right? Am I really in a relationship with Jesus, or am I just going through the motions?
Right. And how do you turn that into a call to action without sounding preachy?
Well, a lot of these sermons, they used powerful storytelling, anecdotes, testimonies of transformation, things like that.
Show, don't tell. I like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, we've talked active growth, but what about grace? It's a huge part of 2 Peter 3:18, but man, it's easy to fall into cliches.
Right.
So how do these pastors handle that?
Well, a lot of them shifted away from grace as just like forgiveness of sins.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
There's got to be more to it than that, right?
Right. So they presented grace as this ongoing force, something that continuously shapes and molds you.
Okay, I like that.
Okay.
So less about a one-time event, more about an ongoing process.
Mm-hmm. And Journey Christian Church, New Orleans, they use this incredible image of endless ocean waves, to capture how grace just keeps coming.
Oh, wow. Okay, so I'm picturing these powerful waves, relentless, constantly shaping the shoreline.
Yeah.
But isn't that kind of, I don't know, a bit passive? Like, growth takes work, right? There's got to be effort involved.
That's a great point. And some sermons address that head on. They talked about how grace is this gift, yeah, but we have to respond to it.
Okay, so we got to meet God halfway, so to speak.
You could say that. It's this beautiful dance between God's empowering grace and our willingness to surrender to that and grow.
I like that, the dance analogy.
Yeah.
Okay, so one sermon that stood out was from Impact Church Bay Area. They had this really unique take on spiritual pruning,
Oh, yeah.
comparing it to, like, a vineyard in Napa Valley. How does that tie into 2 Peter 3:18?
So, when you first prune those vines, they look dead.
Yeah, pretty brutal.
But it's all about yielding even more fruit later on. And that's how they connected it to how God sometimes allows us to go through those difficult seasons. He prunes away things in our lives that are holding us back.
Okay, so it's about trusting that even when things are tough, there's a purpose behind it.
Exactly.
That's a powerful message, especially for people who are going through a rough patch.
It is.
But it's tricky to preach, right? How do you balance that comfort with the reality that that growth can be really painful.
You have to be honest, acknowledge the struggle. And a lot of pastors, they did that by sharing their own stories, times when they felt pruned, when they questioned things.
Makes them human, relatable.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so we've got the active growth, we've got the grace piece, the pruning. These are all great, but how do you make them, like, resonate with people? Bring them down to earth.
That's where those secular illustrations come in.
Oh, yeah. I was wondering about those.
We saw everything from financial investments to, learning to do laundry.
Laundry.
Seriously. It's about finding that connection between, abstract spiritual concepts and everyday life.
Okay, so it's not about, dumbing things down.
No. It's about meeting people where they are, using those everyday experiences to connect on a deeper level.
Right. So, you could say, hey, we all know how to do laundry, but what if I told you there are deep spiritual lessons in folding those socks?
Exactly. It's about making it relatable, making it click.
Okay, I love that. I'm stealing that one.
Go for it.
It's like God's working in all areas of our lives, even the mundane stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so we talked active growth, transformative power of grace, pruning, and the power of relatable examples. What really surprised you going through all these sermons?
Honestly, just the sheer creativity. It's a reminder that, there's always a fresh way to present even the most familiar Bible passages.
Yeah, that's so true. It's easy to get stuck in a rut, especially when you've been preaching on the same verses for years.
Right.
But these pastors showed that there's always something new to discover, a new angle, a different way to connect.
Absolutely.
Okay, so as we wrap up this part of our dive, I want to challenge our listeners. Think about your own congregation, their needs, their experiences. How could you use one of these perspectives, one of these illustrations, to really connect with them in a new way?
2 Peter 3:18, it's not just a verse to be studied. It's a call to action. It's an invitation to embark on this lifelong journey with Christ.
And as you prepare your next sermon, your next Bible study, remember that growth is expected, grace is empowering, and even those trials, they have a purpose.
They do. All right, welcome back to our deep dive into 2 Peter 3:18. We've been talking about how different pastors are approaching this verse, trying to move past the obvious and really connect with their congregations.
And one of the toughest things I find with this verse, at least for me, is preaching on grace, in a way that doesn't just sound like a bunch of cliches.
Yeah, it's easy to fall into that trap, where grace is like this magic wand that fixes everything. But a lot of the sermons we looked at, they went deeper. They showed grace as this powerful force that's constantly working in us, shaping us over time.
So it's not just like a one-time event, right? It's more like a process, a journey.
Yeah.
But how do you get that across without, getting too theological, too heady?
You got to find those illustrations as metaphors that stick. Remember that image of endless ocean waves? Journey Christian Church, right?
Oh, yeah. Beautiful image.
It is. But as we were saying, it could be seen as a bit passive. So how do you bring in that element of personal responsibility?
That's interesting. Well, you could build on that wave analogy, right? Instead of just waves crashing on the shore, what about a surfer riding those waves? It's still got that power, that constancy of grace.
Yeah.
But it also shows that it takes skill, it takes effort.
Oh, I like that. It adds that active element, right? You're not just being tossed around. You're learning to harness that power. And, you could even tie in the idea of wiping out, falling off the board, those times when we mess up.
Oh, yeah, totally. It's like even when we fall, grace is still there. Those waves are still coming. We can get back up.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you make sure it doesn't sound like grace is all about us? Like it's all about our self-improvement.
Right. Well, a lot of these pastors talked about the ripple effect. As we grow in grace, it naturally flows outward.
Okay, yeah, it affects the people around us.
Exactly. It makes us more compassionate, more forgiving.
More like Christ, I guess. But that can sound a bit preachy, can't it?
It can if you're not careful. So you got to back it up with real life examples, stories of people whose lives were changed by grace.
And how that change led them to help others.
Right. To serve, to fight for justice, to make a difference.
So it's showing how grace works in the real world, not just in theory.
Exactly.
Okay, let's switch gears a bit. What about that pruning idea? Powerful, but also a bit, hard to swallow sometimes.
Yeah, especially if you're talking to people who are hurting, going through tough times. It's definitely a sensitive territory.
It is.
But the pastors who talked about it, they did it with a lot of care. They didn't shy away from the fact that pruning can be painful. But they also emphasize the purpose, to help us bear more fruit, to become more like Christ.
So reframing those difficult times as like opportunities for growth.
Right, as part of the process.
But how do you do that in a way that's, I don't know, genuine? Not like you're just trying to put a positive spin on a bad situation.
Yeah. Honestly, you got to be vulnerable. Share your own struggles. Times when you felt pruned, when you question things. People connect with that.
They do. It's like when you're open about your own journey, it gives other people permission to be open too.
Exactly. It creates that safe space. And it shows that you're not, talking down to them. You're right there with them.
Side by side. Yeah, that's good. And you know what struck me about that pruning analogy? It really emphasizes trust. You got to trust that the gardener knows what they're doing, even if you don't get it at the time.
Oh, that's so true. And you can connect that back to 2 Peter 3:18, right? That whole growing in the knowledge of Jesus Christ thing.
Oh, yeah.
The more we truly know him, his character, his love, the easier it is to trust him, even when things are tough.
So it's not just blind faith. It's faith that's rooted in understanding.
Right. A faith that's informed by scripture, by experience.
Okay, so grace, pruning, trust. But there's one more thing we saw in these sermons that we haven't really touched on yet. The power of personal testimony.
Ah, yes. A lot of pastors shared their own stories or stories of people they knew to really show how 2 Peter 3:18 works in real life.
And these weren't just like, feel-good stories. They were real. They were honest about struggles, about growth.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be anything crazy or dramatic. Sometimes the most powerful stories are those simple, everyday moments where God shows up.
Like a time when you felt lost, and then, I don't know, a verse where a person helped you find your way again.
Exactly. Or maybe it's a story about seeing someone else grow in their faith, overcoming a challenge. It's about those moments that people can relate to.
It makes it real, shows them what's possible.
And it's not just about preaching at people. It's about sharing your own journey, inviting them to walk alongside you.
I like that. Okay,
Yeah.
This has been super helpful. I feel like I'm already getting ideas for my next sermon. But I also feel a little overwhelmed, There's so much here. Where do you even start when you're trying to, bring all these elements together?
That's a great question. And it's something we're going to dive into in part 3. We'll talk about structuring your sermon, weaving in those illustrations, and crafting a clear call to action that really inspires people to live out the truths of 2 Peter 3:18.
Sounds good. Looking forward to it. Welcome back to our deep dive, 2 Peter 3:18. We've talked about how to preach on this verse in a way that really connects. But, there's one more piece we haven't really gotten into yet.
And that's the knowledge part of the verse. It's easy to kind of skip over that, especially when we're talking about grace and spiritual growth and all that.
Right, because when you hear grow in knowledge, you might just think, okay, read my Bible more. But the sermons we looked at, they went way deeper.
Yeah, they really stress that it's not just about knowing facts about Jesus. It's about, a relationship with him. That's what really changes us.
So how do you preach on that? I mean, without it just turning into, a dry theology lecture.
Well, some pastors use the actual Greek words from the verse, epiginosko, ginosko. They show the difference between head knowledge and heart knowledge.
Okay, but using Greek in a sermon might lose some people there.
Right. So think of it this way. Imagine reading a travel guide about some amazing place. You learn all about it, but it's not the same as actually going there.
Totally. Like reading of the Eiffel Tower versus actually standing under it. Big difference.
Exactly. Same with Jesus. We can read about him, but it's through that personal relationship that we truly know him.
Okay, so head knowledge versus heart knowledge. But how do you get people to make that shift?
Storytelling, personal stories, when you share those moments where you felt God, where you wrestled with doubt but came out stronger.
Right, because when you're vulnerable, it gives people permission to be vulnerable too.
It makes it real. And it doesn't have to be some crazy story. Sometimes those small moments, those everyday moments where you see God working, those are the most powerful.
So what advice would you give to pastors who are, I don't know, a little scared to share like that?
Start small, a sentence or two, a little story to illustrate a point. And as you get comfortable, you can share more.
Okay, that's good advice. And it reminds me of something we talked about before, those everyday examples. Can we use those to talk about this kind of knowledge too?
Totally. Think about things that show the difference between surface level knowledge and really understanding something, like knowing someone's name versus knowing their heart.
Or being a fan of a sports team versus really knowing the ins and outs of the game.
Exactly. It's about going beyond the surface.
And I love that it shows people how God is working in those everyday moments.
Right. And the more we know Jesus, the more we see his hand in everything.
And that's really what it's all about, right? Growing in grace and knowledge. It changes how we see the world.
It changes how we live.
Yeah. And that's a message that goes way beyond the church walls. It affects
Yeah,
everything.
it does.
Well, this has been such an eye-opening deep dive. I've got a whole new perspective on 2 Peter 3:18, and I'm excited to use these ideas.
And too.
And hey, listeners, this is just the beginning, right? Keep studying this verse, pray for guidance, and be open to how God might be speaking to you through it.
And don't forget to actually put what you learn into practice. Let it change you. Let it change your ministry.
That's right. So until next time, keep seeking, keep growing, keep sharing the good news.